The Jonestown movement and the mass suicide tragedy. Not just a cult, but a social experiment. What could drive more than 900 people, including children, the elderly, and pregnant women, to drink poison together, believing that their deaths were a noble act, the final liberation of humanity? This is not a question from a horror movie. It is a question that history forces us to confront when we speak of Jonestown. Because Jonestown was not merely a fanatical cult. It was a failed social experiment, a place where the most beautiful human ideals were transformed into instruments of control, and where faith, once stripped of limits, led to mass death. This story does not begin with violence. It begins with hope. In America during the 1950s and 1960s, a nation divided by racial segregation, poverty, and social injustice, there was a man standing at the pulpit, holding a Bible, yet speaking of equality. His name was Jim Jones. Jim Jones did not appear as a dictator from the beginning. He was a young preacher who said what many people longed to hear, that black and white people were equal, that the poor deserved respect, that society could, and must, be more just. At a time when many churches still practiced racial discrimination, Jim Jones opened his doors to everyone. And that made him special. Those who came to Jim Jones were not inherently weak. They were people abandoned by society, people of color, poor laborers, broken families, individuals lost in a rapidly changing America. They were not searching for a cult. They were searching for a community. From those early sermons, Jim Jones founded the People's Temple. In name, it was a religious organization. In reality, it functioned as a progressive social movement, blending Christian faith, socialism, and promises of a better world. And then, very slowly, almost without anyone noticing, everything began to change. Jim Jones was no longer merely a messenger. He gradually became the center of everything. He demanded that followers devote all their time to the organization. Biological families were labeled as obstacles. Personal property was voluntarily surrendered to the collective. Sermons stretched on for hours, day after day. Listeners were worn down by exhaustion, emotion, and the fear that leaving would mean betraying the ideals they themselves once believed in. Jim Jones began to claim that he alone could see the truth. Anyone who doubted, anyone who questioned, was no longer just an opponent, but an enemy. A spy. A CIA agent. This was the most dangerous moment in any movement. When ideals become absolute power, and power is no longer restrained. By the late 1970s, the American press began to focus on the People's Temple. Allegations of abuse, brainwashing, and unlawful detention grew increasingly frequent. Jim Jones sensed the threat. And he made a fateful decision: to leave the United States. In 1977, hundreds of followers were taken to Guyana, a small country in South America, deep within tropical jungle, to build a new settlement. They called it Jonestown. On paper, Jonestown was a socialist paradise. A collective labor community, without racial discrimination, without class divisions, where everyone worked for the common good. But reality was different. Deep in the jungle, Jonestown became a closed society. Grueling labor from early morning until late at night. Food shortages. Sleep deprivation. Loudspeakers broadcast Jim Jones's voice day and night, reminding, warning, threatening. Armed guards patrolled the compound. Leaving was nearly impossible. Jim Jones regularly held events called White Night, suicide rehearsals. He told followers that enemies were about to attack, that collective death would be a revolutionary act, the final resistance against a cruel world. At first, they were only words. But with each rehearsal, the line between fiction and reality blurred a little more. Jonestown was no longer a place where people lived. It became a place where people waited for an ending. On November 18, 1978, the outside world finally reached Jonestown. U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan led an investigative delegation to Guyana to examine the allegations. Some followers secretly pleaded for help, asking to leave. To Jim Jones, it was a clear sign, his control was cracking. As Leo Ryan's group departed Jonestown for the Port Kaituma airstrip, they were ambushed. Gunfire erupted. Congressman Leo Ryan was killed, becoming the first sitting U.S. congressman to die in the line of duty. At the same time, back in Jonestown, Jim Jones gathered the entire community. He declared that there was no way out, that the world would not let them live, and that the time had come to carry out the final revolutionary act. Cyanide was mixed into fruit juice. More than 900 people lined up. Some believed. Some were afraid. Some resisted but were forced. Children had no choice. Within hours, Jonestown became a mass grave. It was the largest mass death in modern history not caused by war. When the world learned of Jonestown, the first reaction was horror. The second reaction was outrage. And the final reaction, often the easiest, was to label the dead as fanatics. But history does not allow us such simplicity. Jonestown is not just the story of a mad cult. It is a chilling warning about the power of collective psychological manipulation, the danger of unchecked absolute authority, and the way beautiful ideals can be twisted into instruments of destruction. Jim Jones did not create a monster from nothing. He exploited fear, loneliness, and the longing for justice, profoundly human traits. And precisely because of that, Jonestown is more terrifying than any horror story. Because it reminds us that tragedy does not arise only from obvious evil, but sometimes from dreams that are trusted too deeply. If history has a duty, it is to force us to remember, so that we do not repeat it.